In Uncle Buck's library, I found this book, The Teachings of the Mystic, and it's great. It's all of these selections from all these different traditions about mystical experiences. But what caught my eye was a contemporary mystical experience by Arthur Koestler, who I love because this book has been in my backpack for like 2 or 3 months, and it's just such a beautiful piece of science writing about the heliocentric universe and the personalities around it. He gets inside the head of these old scientists like Kepler and Galileo, and it's a beautiful, such a big picture person with such a granular love of humans and our foibles. And it turns out he had a mystical experience so profound that it got into this little book of the best thinkers of all the ages. And his is really intense because it happened to him in prison when he's waiting to get shot by Franco's people. So this might be a 2-part series, but I'll read a little bit of the intro here and then about his experience. But the editor of this series says that he was in prison during the Spanish Civil War because he was a communist, and Franco's people accused him of being a spy for the Popular Front. And every night, other prisoners in the middle of the night would be taken out of their cells and then taken to the cemetery and shot. And you just never knew if you were going to be next, and he certainly could have been next. But he started having mystical experiences there. And as the editor notes about these, it's important to note that these experiences gradually completely altered the author's life, his philosophy, and his attitude towards the world. He talked about his politics and I think in his science writing, you see all of this. And the editor finishes with, if anyone thinks that mysticism consists in useless dreaming, or in the idle and selfish enjoyment of wonderful experiences without any practical and valuable effects in life, they have here their answer. It is a universal testimony of those who know that mystical experiences transform human life and alters character, often from the squalid and mean to the noble and selfless. And now the account from Koestler himself, the first 8 paragraphs from his autobiography, and this section's called The Hours by the Window. I was standing at the recessed window of cell number 40, and with a piece of iron spring that I had extracted from the wire mattress, was scratching mathematical formula on the wall. Mathematics, in particular analytical geometry, had been the favorite hobby of my youth, neglected later on for many years. I was trying to remember how to derive the formula of the hyperbola, and was stumped. Then I tried the ellipse and parabola, and to my delight, succeeded. Next I went on to recall Euclid's proof that the number of primes is infinite. Since I had become acquainted with Euclid's proof at school, it had always filled me with a deep satisfaction that was aesthetic rather than intellectual. Now, as I recalled the method and scratched the symbols on the wall, I felt the same enchantment. And then, for the first time, I suddenly understood the reason for this enchantment. The scribbled symbols on the wall represented one of the rare cases where a meaningful and comprehensive statement about the infinite is arrived at by precise and finite means. The infinite is a mystical mass shrouded in haze, and yet it was possible to gain some knowledge of it without losing oneself in treacly ambiguities. He sounds like Melville here. The significance of this swept over me like a wave. The wave had originated in an articulate verbal insight, but this evaporated at once, leaving in its wake only a wordless essence, a fragrance of eternity, a quiver of the arrow in the blue. I must have stood there for some minutes, entranced, with a wordless awareness that this is perfect. Perfect. Until I noticed some slight mental discomfort nagging at the back of my mind, some trivial circumstance that marred the perfection of the moment. Then I remembered the nature of that irrelevant annoyance. I was, of course, in prison and might be shot. But this was immediately answered by a feeling whose verbal translation would be, so what? Is that all? Have you got nothing more serious to worry about? An answer so spontaneous, fresh, and amused as if the intruding annoyance had been the loss of a collar stud. Then I was floating on my back in a river of peace under bridges of silence. It came from nowhere and flowed nowhere. Then there was no river and no I. Then I had ceased to exist. It is extremely embarrassing to write down a phrase like that when one has read The Meaning of Meaning, logic book, I think, and nibbled at logical positivism, and aims at verbal precision, and dislikes nebulous gushing. Yet, mystical experiences, as we dubiously call them, are not nebulous, vague, or maudlin. They only become so when we debase them by verbalization. However, to communicate what is incommunicable by its nature, one must somehow put it into words, and so one moves in a vicious circle. When I say the I had ceased to exist, I refer to a concrete experience that is verbally as incommunicable as a feeling aroused by a piano concerto, yet just as real, only much more real. In fact, its primary mark is a sensation that this state is more real than any other one has experienced before, that for the first time the veil has fallen and one is in touch with real reality, the hidden order of things, the X-ray texture of the world, normally obscured by layers of irrelevancy. What distinguishes this type of experience from the emotional entrancement of music, landscapes, or love is noumenal, I think it means without words, content. It is meaningful, though not in verbal terms. Verbal transcriptions that come nearest to it are the unity and interlocking of everything that exists, an interdependence like that of gravitational fields or communicating vessels. The I ceases to exist because it has, by a kind of mental osmosis, established communication with and been dissolved in the universal pool. It is this process of dissolution and limitless expansion which is sensed as the oceanic feeling, as the draining of all tension, the absolute catharsis, the peace that passeth all understanding. The coming back to the lower order of reality I found to be gradual, like waking up from anesthesia. There was the equation of the parabola stretched on the dirty wall, the iron bed and the iron table and the strip of blue Andalusian sky. But there was no unpleasant hangover, as from other modes of intoxication. On the contrary, there remained a sustained and invigorating, serene, and fear-dispelling after-effect that lasted for hours and days. It was as if a massive dose of vitamins had been injected into the veins. Or, to change the metaphor, I resumed my travels through my cell, like an old car with its batteries freshly recharged. Whether the experience had lasted for a few minutes or an hour, I never knew. In the beginning, it occurred 2 or even 3 times a week. Then the intervals became longer. It could never be voluntarily induced. After my liberation, it recurred at even longer intervals, perhaps once or twice in a year. But by that time, the groundwork for a change of personality was completed. I shall henceforth refer to these experiences as the hours by the window. Thanks, Uncle Buck. Thanks, Koestler. And thanks, Walter Stace.